Mentally strong people are not defined by what they conquer, but by what they understand. They do not wake up every morning feeling invincible, confident, or fearless. They wake up human. They feel hesitation, fatigue, and sometimes doubt. Yet what makes them different is not the absence of these experiences, but the way they relate to them. Instead of treating their inner life as an obstacle, they treat it as a landscape to explore. They listen to themselves with patience rather than judgment. When anxiety appears, they do not rush to silence it. They pause and ask what it is trying to protect. When sadness arises, they do not label it as weakness. They recognize it as a sign of attachment, of care, of depth. They understand that emotions are not enemies to defeat, but messages to decode. This understanding slowly transforms their relationship with suffering. They no longer add a second layer of pain by telling themselves that they should not feel what they feel. They stop wasting energy fighting reality and begin investing energy in responding wisely to it. Over time, this creates a profound sense of inner stability. Life still brings challenges, losses, and uncertainty, but these experiences no longer threaten their sense of self. They learn to remain present when discomfort arises, to breathe when the mind accelerates, to return gently to the body when thoughts become overwhelming. They cultivate the art of pausing, that small but decisive moment between what happens and how they respond. In that pause, they rediscover freedom, freedom from impulsive reactions, from automatic patterns, from becoming someone they do not wish to be under pressure. They learn that strength is not speed, not hardness, not domination. Strength is clarity. Strength is the capacity to stay conscious when emotions are intense, to remain kind when self-criticism appears, to choose values over impulses. They accept their vulnerability without shame.
Understanding that to be affected is not to be weak, but to be alive. Because they accept vulnerability, they become resilient. They bend instead of breaking. They rest instead of collapsing. They ask for help instead of isolating themselves behind pride. They speak to themselves with respect, knowing that a mind under constant attack cannot grow. Self-compassion becomes a discipline, not a comfort. It allows them to take responsibility without cruelty, to correct their course without destroying their confidence. They protect their attention as one protects something precious. They notice when their mind is pulled endlessly into regrets about the past or fears about the future, and they gently guide it back to what is here, to what is real, to what is within reach. This repeated return builds calm not as a personality trait, but as a skill. They abandon the illusion that life should always be comfortable and accept that discomfort is part of caring, loving, and growing. Anxiety becomes a sign of engagement, not failure. Uncertainty becomes a companion rather than an enemy. They understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to stay present in its presence. They are patient with change, knowing that deep transformation follows the rhythm of the nervous system, not the impatience of the ego. They fall back into old habits and return again, without drama, without despair. This patience builds trust with themselves, and trust becomes the foundation of lasting strength. Meaning anchors them when conditions are difficult, not abstract meaning, but lived meaning. How they choose to act, how they treat others, how they remain faithful to what matters even when life is heavy. Their strength does not seek applause. It grows quietly in ordinary moments, in simple acts of presence, in conscious breathing, in walking without rushing, in listening fully. They respect the body, knowing that mental balance cannot exist without physical care. Through small choices made again and again, especially on days when nothing feels easy. There will be moments when you feel discouraged, when old patterns return, when rest becomes responsibility, not weakness. Calm becomes something they practice, not something they wait for. And slowly, without dramatic turning points, their inner world becomes less hostile, more spacious, more reliable. They do not dominate life, they cooperate with it. They stop trying to control everything and begin guiding themselves with firmness and kindness. Their strength endures because it is not built on force, but on understanding. This way of living is not reserved for a few exceptional individuals. It is available to anyone willing to change their relationship with themselves. It begins the moment you stop asking yourself how to become stronger and start asking how to become more present. In motivation, this sense is not a burst of energy, but a quiet commitment. A commitment to meet yourself honestly each day, to notice what is happening inside without turning away, to choose awareness over avoidance. Progress does not come from pushing yourself beyond your limits, but from learning to recognize your limits and work with them intelligently. Each time you pause instead of reacting, you strengthen your freedom. Each time you speak to yourself with respect instead of contempt, you build resilience. Each time you return your attention to the present instead of getting lost in fear, you reclaim energy. Strength grows through repetition. Your mind tells you that nothing is changing. Mentally strong people do not interpret these moments as failure. They see them as part of the process. They understand that growth is rarely linear, that setbacks are not signs to stop, but invitations to begin again. They continue not because they feel confident, but because they have learned to trust the process. Over time, this trust transforms their relationship with effort. They no longer force themselves through life. They accompany themselves. Motivation becomes steadiness rather than pressure. It is the quiet decision to stay, to remain engaged, to keep choosing presence even when the mind wants to escape. They do not wait for perfect conditions to feel calm or confident. They practice calm within imperfection. They learn that peace is not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to face difficulty without abandoning themselves. This is why their strength lasts. It is not dependent on circumstances, performance, or approval. It comes from a deep, lived understanding that life includes uncertainty, vulnerability, and impermanence, and that one can still live with dignity, clarity, and kindness within these conditions. When you begin to live this way, something fundamental shifts. You stop fighting who you are and start working with who you are. You become less reactive, more grounded, less harsh, more steady. You may not feel powerful in the traditional sense, but you will feel anchored. And this anchoring changes everything. It allows you to move forward without violence, to grow without self-betrayal, to face life not as an enemy to conquer, but as a reality to engage with fully. This is the motivation that endures. Not the excitement of becoming someone else, but the quiet strength of becoming more yourself. One conscious moment, as this way of living deepens, mentally strong people begin to notice subtle but profound shifts in how they move through the world. Situations that once overwhelmed them now feel manageable, not because life has become easier, but because their inner stance has changed. They no longer measure their worth by constant productivity or external success. They understand that value is not earned through exhaustion. It is expressed through coherence between what they feel, what they think, and how they act. This coherence brings a quiet confidence, not the confidence that needs to be seen or affirmed, but the confidence of someone who knows they can face discomfort without abandoning themselves. When challenges arise, they feel the familiar sensations of tension and uncertainty, yet they also recognize a deeper layer of stability beneath these waves. They trust their capacity to respond, even if they do not yet know how. This trust reduces panic. It allows them to stay present instead of rushing toward premature solutions or harsh judgments. They learn that not knowing is not a failure, but a natural state when life is unfolding. Instead of demanding immediate clarity, they allow understanding to mature with time. This patience creates space for insight, creativity, and wiser choices. Motivation, in this context, is not about forcing movement forward at all costs, but about staying engaged with life as it is, step by step, without betrayal of oneself. Over time, this inner stability reshapes relationships as well. Mentally strong people listen more and react less. They recognize their emotional triggers and take responsibility for them instead of projecting them onto others. When conflict appears, they do not immediately seek to win or defend. They seek to understand. They notice the fear or pain beneath anger, both in themselves and in others. This does not mean they accept everything or avoid boundaries. On the contrary, their boundaries become clearer and calmer. They say no without aggression. They express needs without guilt. Because they are no longer fighting themselves, they have less need to fight others. Their presence becomes reassuring rather than tense. People feel it. Conversations slow down. Trust grows. And even when misunderstandings occur, they are less devastating Because mentally strong people do not confuse disagreement with rejection. They know that connection can survive imperfection. This understanding reduces loneliness, not by eliminating distance, but by making space for authentic contact. They no longer seek to be admired. They seek to be real. And in being real, they build deeper bonds. Their relationship with time also changes. Mentally strong people stop living as if everything must happen immediately. They understand that urgency is often an expression of anxiety, not necessity. They learn to distinguish what truly requires action from what is simply uncomfortable to wait for. This discernment protects them from burnout. They allow themselves rhythms, periods of effort, and periods of rest. They stop glorifying constant tension and begin to respect recovery. Rest is no longer something to earn. It is something to honor. In resting, they are not escaping life, but sustaining it. This respect for rhythm aligns them more closely with their natural energy. They become more effective, not because they do more, but because they do what they do with greater presence and intention. Mentally strong people also develop a different relationship with success and failure. Success no longer defines them, and failure no longer destroys them. They understand that both are temporary states, not identities. When things go well, they feel gratitude without arrogance. When things go poorly, they feel disappointment without collapse. They extract meaning rather than condemnation from experience. Each situation becomes information rather than a verdict on their worth. This perspective creates resilience that does not depend on circumstances. They remain engaged even when outcomes are uncertain. They continue to act according to their values even when recognition is absent. This alignment with values becomes their deepest source of motivation. It gives direction when enthusiasm fades. It gives continuity when external rewards disappear. As this motivation matures, it becomes quieter but stronger. It no longer relies on excitement or intensity. It relies on commitment. Commitment to showing up honestly. Commitment to caring for the inner world as carefully as the outer one.
Commitment to choosing presence again and again, even when the mind prefers distraction. Mentally strong people do not expect perfection from themselves. They expect sincerity. They forgive themselves for being human while remaining responsible for their actions. This balance between kindness and responsibility is rare, and it is powerful. It allows growth without violence. It allows discipline without humiliation. Eventually, something fundamental settles within them. Life feels less like a constant struggle and more like a dialogue. Difficult moments still arise, but they are no longer interpreted as personal attacks. They are understood as part of the human condition. Joy becomes simpler, less dependent on achievement. Calm becomes more accessible, even in complexity. There is a growing sense of being at home within oneself. This does not mean constant happiness. It means reliability, a sense that whatever arises, they can meet it without collapsing or hardening. This inner home becomes the true source of strength. And from this place, motivation flows naturally, not as pressure, not as urgency, but as direction. A quiet inner yes to life as it is, combined with a steady willingness to grow. This is the motivation that endures when circumstances change, when energy fluctuates, when certainty disappears. It is the motivation of someone who has stopped fighting themselves and started walking with themselves, step by step, breath by breath, moment by moment. With time, mentally strong people also develop a wiser relationship with their thoughts. They understand that thoughts are events of the mind, not commands and not absolute truths. A thought can appear convincing, urgent, or frightening, and still be inaccurate. Instead of obeying every mental narrative, they learn to observe thoughts with a certain distance. They notice how the mind constantly comments, judges, predicts, and compares. They do not try to stop this activity,
because they know the mind cannot be forced into silence. What they learn instead is discernment. They ask themselves simple questions. Is this thought helpful? Is it grounded in reality? Does it deserve my energy right now? By doing this, they reduce the power of repetitive, anxious thinking. They stop being dragged by every inner voice. This creates a sense of inner freedom that many people never experience. Freedom not from thinking, but freedom within thinking. This change deeply affects how they experience anxiety. Anxiety no longer feels like an enemy that must be eliminated. It becomes a signal that attention is needed, a sign that something matters, that something requires care or adjustment. Instead of tightening against anxiety, they soften around it. They breathe. They allow the physical sensations to be present without immediately constructing catastrophic stories. They discover that anxiety, when met with awareness, often peaks and then dissolves on its own. This experience builds confidence. Not the confidence that anxiety will never return, but the confidence that it can be faced. This is a crucial shift. It transforms fear from a paralyzing force into a manageable experience. Mentally strong people also learn to grieve properly. They allow losses to affect them. They do not rush the process or judge themselves for feeling pain. They understand that grief is not something to get over, but something to move through. By allowing sadness to exist, they prevent it from becoming chronic bitterness or emotional numbness. They learn that tears are not a failure of strength, but a form of release. Grief, when respected, deepens sensitivity and compassion. It expands the heart rather than closing it. This ability to grieve fully is one of the quiet pillars of mental strength. Their inner world becomes less combative. Mentally strong people find that joy becomes more accessible. Not intense excitement, but simple, grounded joy. The joy of being present with someone without distraction. The joy of feeling aligned with oneself. These moments are subtle, and that is why many miss them. Mentally strong people do not overlook them. They know that a life built only on peaks will feel empty in between. They learn to nourish themselves with what is already there. This does not make them passive. It makes them appreciative. And appreciation strengthens motivation far more reliably than constant desire. They also redefine ambition. Ambition is no longer about proving worth or compensating for insecurity. It becomes an expression of values. They pursue goals not to escape themselves, but to express who they are. This changes everything. Effort becomes less violent. Discipline becomes more sustainable. When fatigue appears, they do not immediately abandon their path, but they also do not crush themselves. They adjust. They listen. They recalibrate. This flexibility keeps them moving forward over the long term. Mentally strong people are also careful with comparison. They know that comparing their inner life to the outer image of others is a guaranteed source of suffering. They recognize how social comparison feeds inadequacy and restlessness. When comparison arises, they notice it without feeding it. They return to their own path, their own rhythm, their own values. This does not mean they isolate themselves from others. It means they stop measuring their worth against distorted reflections. They learn that growth is personal, not competitive. As years pass, this way of living creates a deep sense of coherence. There is less fragmentation between different roles and moments of life. They are not one person at work and another in private. They strive for consistency, not perfection. This coherence brings peace. It reduces the constant inner negotiation that exhausts so many people. Decisions become simpler because they are guided by clear inner reference points rather than fluctuating emotions or external pressure. Motivation, at this stage, is no longer something they seek. It is something that emerges naturally from alignment. When actions are aligned with values, energy follows. Even difficult tasks feel more bearable because they make sense. Meaning becomes a renewable resource. It sustains effort when pleasure is absent. It supports endurance when enthusiasm fades. Mentally strong people also accept the reality of impermanence. They know that everything changes: moods, relationships, bodies, circumstances. Instead of clinging desperately to what is pleasant or resisting what is unpleasant, they practice letting things move. This does not make them detached or indifferent. It makes them less afraid. They appreciate what is present without demanding that it last forever. This attitude softens fear of loss and reduces anxiety about the future. From this place, compassion naturally expands beyond the self. Mentally strong people become more understanding of others, not because they excuse harmful behavior, but because they recognize shared humanity. They see fear behind aggression, insecurity behind arrogance, pain behind withdrawal. This perspective reduces hatred and increases clarity. It allows them to set boundaries without hatred and to protect themselves without hardening their heart. Eventually, they realize that mental strength is not a destination. It is a way of walking. There is no final state of calm where nothing ever disturbs them again. There is only a growing capacity to meet what arises with awareness, patience, and kindness. Some days they will succeed. Other days they will struggle, and they accept both without turning either into an identity. This is the deepest form of motivation, not the promise of becoming flawless, but the commitment to remain present, not the fantasy of control, but the courage to engage with uncertainty. Mentally strong people do not seek to escape life. They choose to inhabit it fully. Mentally strong people also develop a deeper sense of responsibility, one that is neither heavy nor punitive. They stop blaming circumstances, others, or their past for everything that happens inside them. At the same time, they stop blaming themselves harshly for what is beyond their control. They learn to distinguish clearly between what belongs to them and what is not. This clarity is empowering. It directs energy where it can actually make a difference. They take responsibility for their attitudes, their choices, and their actions, while accepting that many aspects of life remain uncertain and uncontrollable. This balance between responsibility and acceptance is one of the strongest foundations of inner stability. As their inner dialogue becomes more respectful, mentally strong people notice that decision-making becomes calmer. They no longer make choices primarily to escape discomfort or seek immediate relief. They pause and ask deeper questions. Does this choice align with my values? Does it respect my limits? Does it move me toward the life I want to live? Even if it is uncomfortable in the short term, this kind of reflection reduces impulsivity and regret. It allows them to act with integrity rather than urgency. They also learn to be alone without feeling empty. Solitude stops being something to avoid and becomes something to inhabit. In moments of solitude, they meet themselves without distraction. They listen to their inner state. They notice what is present. This ability to be alone without anxiety strengthens independence and emotional maturity. It reduces the tendency to seek constant validation or stimulation. From this place, relationships become a choice rather than a necessity for emotional survival. They connect not to fill a void, but to share presence. Mentally strong people cultivate gratitude, not as forced positivity, but as attention to what is still alive and meaningful even in difficulty. Gratitude does not deny pain. In the end, they realize that mental strength is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more fully oneself, stripped of unnecessary defenses, free from constant self-judgment, anchored in awareness and kindness. This is not a dramatic transformation visible from the outside. It is a quiet revolution inside. And it is this quiet revolution that sustains motivation over a lifetime, allowing one to move forward with steadiness, dignity, and depth.